It is super exciting to have back on the podcast Marc Smolowitz, director and conceptor of the G Word film that is hopefully, actually, we may need to get an update, Marc, on where that is in terms of pre-production and launching. But Marc, you're here with us today because this is the beginning of Gifted Talented Neurodiverse Awareness Week, which the G Word film is kind of throwing out there for the world. So tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I love it. So first of all, thank you for having me back. I always love talking to you, Sophia, because I feel like I'm talking to the future whenever we get on a Zoom together. Yeah, GTN Awareness Week. So Gifted Talented Neurodiverse Awareness Week, the G, the T, and the N, in the same room together for 5 virtual days of programming. For us, the G Word is our movie. It is our tentpole enterprise. We're in post-production. We're making our movie, but we definitely have, bigger goals and bigger ambitions for the film to operate as kind of an impact enterprise, whereby the film creates important national and international conversations about giftedness. And so about a year ago, we published our Impact Manifesto, which was our statement in front of the public, going on record with our values, our vision, our mission, and some of the goals and initiatives and programs that we're going to undertake to have that positive impact on the world. And one of those ideas has always been to have an awareness week, a week of events, that would get people talking about giftedness in a new and important way. As we all know, and I'm sure this is the same in Australia, here in the US, we have many awareness days, awareness weeks, awareness months. As I sit here with you, there's, in October, there are many going on. It's Dyslexia Awareness Month here in the US, for example. So for me, it was important to think about how could we harness the power of marketing and outreach and engagement to create more awareness. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to give people a time of year that they can focus on it, to give organizations, stakeholders, advocates, the press, the community at large, a time to think and talk and dream about this stuff together. And it's done all the time. Why not do it for Gifted? There is no official Gifted Awareness Week in the United States. There have been some programs that have been tried that have not been ongoing, that have not been sustained for multiple years or over time. And so I saw an opportunity for our movie as an enterprise to try to create that, to try to bring people together under the banner of the G Word, which is really focused on empowerment and storytelling and finding our voice together, to do that awareness building together. So this week, October 25th through 29th, is a pilot. It's a first attempt at sort of showing the world what that program can look like. For us, it's 5 days of virtual programming. All of it is free. People are registering for it on our website, and they are showing up every day for webinars and other kinds of online events that we're pulling together with people like you who are advisors and partners of the movie. And it's been quite a lively few weeks of planning it and getting it together and figuring out how to make this meaningful for diverse audiences. And every day there will be something of interest, and people who've registered will get an email in their inbox telling them what's on today. And I will have the pleasure of moderating many of these conversations, on these webinars. But my hope is to really kind of be the kind of facilitator that really gathers people together in a Zoom room, gets out of the way, and empowers others to have a voice in these discussions. So yeah, it's an experiment, a lively one for sure, and one we're excited about.
Well, we love a good experiment, and there are just a bunch of things that I love about that. I love the G Word film and the work that you're doing in terms of bringing the community together and kind of rallying everyone behind the film. I think that that's really special and needed, and thank you for your leadership in that respect. And I love that you've actually put together gifted, talented, and neurodiverse, because I think so often giftedness isn't seen as a neurodiversity. And I think that's one of the many challenges of giftedness. So before we jump into Gifted, Talented, and Neurodiverse Awareness Week, can you give us a little update on the film and where you're at?
Oh, sure, of course. So the film is going well. It's coming along beautifully. So we are in what we call post-production. So we are in that phase of the making the movie where we're pretty much done filming, and we are primarily focused on editing together the material. And in our movie, there are 7 stories. I kind of, there's sort of 7 different stories. That's the best way to describe it. And they take you to different places and spaces across our great nation where you don't expect to encounter giftedness, or you don't expect to encounter it in the mainstream sense. So it's not just this white male cisgender version of intelligence and achievement. It's rather looks like diverse America. So it's Black and brown and indigenous and LGBTQ plus, and focus on the idea that giftedness can reside in poor neighborhoods where it's undiscovered or underidentified. It's really a film about equity and a film about identity. And so we have 7 stories that are a combination of urban, suburban, and rural zip codes, and that help you kind of contemplate a national snapshot of what giftedness looks like here in the United States in the 21st century. I'm very delighted with how these 7 stories are taking shape. It's a lot of material that people haven't seen yet, so they're going to be really surprised by some of it. For your audience who may be out there and have been following the movie, we do have 6 short films that are on our website and also on a Vimeo gallery that people can watch. And I really encourage people to watch those. It's 56 minutes of short film content that really does kind of look, feel, smell, taste like what the movie hopes to be in the world. In particular, there's a couple of stories in there that feel very much like they're in the movie and they're just going deeper, right? With which is the story in San Luis at the U.S. border with Mexico. There's the story of you meet Ilan in the short My Family Still Calls Me Gabby, and we actually see Ilan 6 years later after their transition, now with their partner Church, who's also trans, and we really have a beautiful kind of then and now arc with them. We have a story that is you kind of encounter all these different experts on our website in an experts video. A number of them have scaled into actual stories about the African American experience and giftedness. Yeah, it's really a beautiful mashup of what America really feels like to me: diverse, dynamic, intersectional. I think that's really what the G word hopes to be about. And so by the end of this year, we hope to have what we call the first rough cut. So that's the movie in its rough form, all these 7 stories woven together. Right now there's still assemblies, meaning they're kind of standalone sections. And now we have the job this fall of weaving them together and making them into one movie. And then the next job will be to weave in all the experts and ideas. So we actually had the great fortune to sit down with some 40 experts sort of across the gifted and talented neurodiverse conversation, people who are a mixture of really established voices, some people who were in their 70s and 80s and who have been in this field for decades, and who are some of the legacy voices who I feel maybe are sitting down with us for, really kind of late in life legacy interview, to some of the really new and emerging faces and voices who are challenging our deepest assumptions around what is giftedness, and really owning that equity piece, and understanding that diversity and equity and inclusion are kind of critical parts of making all this matter for the largest number of people. Yeah, so it's, it will be eventually a 100-minute film. That's my sort of target running time. So it's a feature-length movie where you sit down and you're kind of, immersively in these 7 stories, moving from place to place, seeing how all these stories sort of interact with each other. I do think that you could imagine a project where these 7 stories are like 7 short films that all kind of stand apart from each other. But what is going to make them make sense for me is weaving them together. So giving you that interwoven, immersive, poetic sense of connection across these stories. And another interesting thing. So lately I've been calling the movie a polyvocal meditation on giftedness and identity. So think about that, a polyvocal, wow, yeah, meaning many voices, yep, meditation on giftedness and identity. And, I'm always thinking of new ways to describe the film that feel kind of powerful and relevant to communicate our message. And lately I've landed on that because I'm really focused on this idea of many voices, one movie.
Yeah, and that just sounds fabulous. And I know I'm going to need the tissues. I'll have tissues ready because even just in your shorts, it's deep. Like there's big issues going on here, and I'm really looking forward to that. So very exciting. Thank you. Thanks for the update. So now I understand we're going to turn the tables a little bit in this podcast, and you've actually got some questions for me, which is a bit different. Shall we jump into that?
I love that. I love turning the tables. Yeah, so one of the things that is going to happen on Monday, October 25th, in the United States as part of GTN Awareness Week, is our first webinar will be a webinar that is a state of the state of giftedness. So it's being told to us through the lens and the voices of people just like you, podcasters and citizen journalists, who many of whom have been moms or educators or other stakeholders in the gifted journey, who decided that they wanted to grab hold of the mic, of that citizen journalism platform and tell a story and tell other people's stories and use podcasting or some other similar kind of approach to gather the voices of many into one project. And I think that as a podcaster, someone like you is really out there in the field, talking to your guests, hearing from your audience, managing your social media platforms, seeing what people are thinking about and responding to in real time. What's the stuff that gets the most comments, the most reactions, the most engagement? And so the idea behind that webinar on Monday, the 25th, is about capturing those voices of those podcasters. And so here I am with you, and I want to know what you think of that. So if I was going to say to you, Sophia, tell me about the state of giftedness based on the things that you've been hearing on your podcast in the last year. What would you share with me? I know, and of course it's sort of like it's a big open-ended question, but you could sort of like take a moment to kind of think back to some of your guests, think back to the kind of powerful and prescient reactions you've had from your audience. And I know you said you're having a large following that is, a footprint here in the United States, which I think that's also an amazing part of this time in which we live and work, is that everybody is sort of global by default, right? And
yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So what do you think? And especially now coming out of the pandemic, because this to me feels extremely kind of a pivotal piece of it, is that for 18 months, we've been living with this, challenging thing that is planetary. And it has made us rethink so many aspects of our civil society, including education and how students learn and how people thrive and how people communicate with each other and create community together. It's a real chance for us to ask, okay, well, where are we now? What are we thinking about? What are our priorities? And what kind of 2022 do we want to create? What kind of 2022 do we want to create? That's the question.
Yeah, I like that. And wow, like you say, that's a big question. A couple of things that you've said there that have made me think is, first of all, it's the global nature of the challenge that always kind of strikes me. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. Parents out there are having the exact same challenges in terms of parenting their gifted and neurodiverse child, and usually with school and education. I don't actually feel like anyone has cracked this nut. That feedback from parents is pretty much global and universal in nature. And the audience has been, frankly, amazing. When I started on this journey, I didn't know what to expect. I just kind of felt like, we needed to get together and talk about this, and we needed to do better. And so, like you say, our audience here for our gifted kids is a large American audience, a large Australian audience, and then we have lots of other random places like the UK, South Africa, Singapore, South America, and little blips all over the place, which is quite humbling as well. Just sitting here, currently sitting here in my bedroom in Adelaide, doing a podcast with people from all over the world, because my husband's in the office working. And thankfully the kids are at school. It's all very domestic here. And I think I've been incredibly humbled by the generosity of everyone in the community. And I've managed to talk to some, frankly, amazing people, like you say, who have been doing this work for decades and have so much to share, who just want to share it, and like are completely generous with their time and knowledge and really want to do better for the kids, because at the end of the day, it's very much about we can all do better for the kids. And just when you mentioned the global pandemic, it made me think that, you know, we've got lots of parents at home doing the homeschooling thing. And another kind of fairly universal theme that comes up is parents are at home facilitating homeschooling. So that kind of role has, communication and role has changed between parent, student, teacher. And a lot of parents are kind of saying, well, I can see now exactly what they're doing and why they're bored. And those conversations have shifted because the parent is kind of, you know, a bit more in the driver's seat with the kid at home, not that they want to be, but are kind of stuck in that situation where everyone's isolating and they're trying to get their child to do the schoolwork, but they can see that actually it's like way too easy, or it's just not engaging for their child. So they're having these, you know, continually having these conversations about getting different work for them. And I think it's really put very squarely in the face of parents, the predicament of their children at school. I mean, I think they already knew it, but this is kind of like in your face, can't not see that, you know, can't not deal with that because we're all stuck at home. And the effects are very real of just trying to get them sit down and do things. And I think that has come back from like lots of different countries, parents I've talked to. That's pretty universal as well, and sad in a way. I think what it shows me is how underprepared our teachers are, you know, and for me, we're very much in this together. Parents, educators, you know, the professional services that wrap around kids who have special and specific needs. It's by in no ways kind of blaming or pointing fingers. It's like, okay, we're in this predicament. We got to get out of this together. And acknowledging that our teachers go through university not getting this info, not being trained about what is 10% of their student population who have high special needs, and they're kind of getting thrown into the classroom with kids of multi-levels already, let alone these extreme kids, and we're not preparing them and we're not supporting them. And I have to say, what breaks my brain is we have all of this academic research, like decades of it, that keeps throwing up the same things. In multiple countries, we know that not having adequate education for gifted students can lead to all sorts of mental health and other challenges, really serious stuff, proven with research from academics, from amazing universities. And yet it's the universities who are not training the teachers in this area. Because I was thinking about that, the state of giftedness. We're going to do a podcast later in the week about policy and legislation. And being from politics, I spent a good decade or so in politics. And so I know politicians really well and the way it works. And they very much rely on the expertise around them. And I think one of the key problems of giftedness is people don't get it, you know, and they don't get it because we're not training them. We're not providing that information. That actually starts at university, which is the same places that are doing the research that, you know, it's all there at uni, the information that we need. And it's sort of like, we can actually just start a revolution at universities. You know, if I was going to start a revolution, and which is in the back of my brain for the next couple of years, like I'm here for the long haul and I'm here for change. I'm not even sure I would start with politicians. I would probably start with deans and chancellors of universities, heads of education, and kind of go, look at the wonderful research your academics are doing, and yet you're not listening to. You could include in your university courses for teachers this information, and then you're preparing them for the future. And then, of course, we've got to access teachers that are already in the classroom as well. So when I start thinking about it, I start going off into tangents like that and multi-layered political strategies and campaigns. But I think there's a lot we can do. And I think it starts with education and explaining to people what giftedness is all about. Because I think we're still very hung up on the idea that it's all about high IQ and it's about achieving well. And those gifted kids in the classroom, highly, even profoundly gifted kids, most likely underperforming, behaving badly, you know, and that's not the high achieving, high IQ stereotype that people have in their head, but they're the ones that desperately need help. And they're the ones whose parents desperately need help. And we're not getting that understanding. So I could go on.
I mean, what you've said, I think is extremely important. Like, you know, this idea of engaging universities that are interested in the future of education and training teachers, and thinking of education sort of as an academic undertaking, as a research undertaking, as an undertaking that is critical to the health and well-being of our civil society at large, right? Like we're nothing if our education system is broken. And I don't believe it's entirely broken. I mean, I know that there are absolute cracks in the system everywhere. The pandemic has shown us that. The pandemic has shown us that there are cracks in every system, that there's inequity across systems. And that only you know, emboldens us to work harder, right? And fight harder for the changes that we know are critically important to make this decade in this century better for more people than less. And I think that if you're hearing that kind of sentiment across your podcast in different countries, different folks around the world, that, you know, that's not surprising, right? That if we have to, you know, think about education as something that it's this virtuous cycle of opportunity and challenges for all different folks on the spectrum of this discussion. You know, I mean, you cannot have a good vital education system if you're not training teachers, right?
Yeah.
The people who train the teachers have to be exposed to the different types of students that might show up in their classrooms, right? You know, of the teachers that they're training. You know, I mean, it all goes hand in hand, right? On the one hand, if you do a better job at identifying and discovering gifted and neurodiverse children, you know, and suddenly you have a very diverse cohort in the classroom that represents those gifted kids, right? You have to be able to teach that diversity, right?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? And, you know, not every teacher, you know, has this sort of, you know, tools in the toolbox, you know, to be competent across cultures, you know, and connect with those students in ways that really support their gifts, you know, and help them, you know, unleash those gifts in ways that are authentic for themselves. It's, you know, it's a beautiful opportunity if we can really contemplate meeting it where it resides.
Absolutely. And, you know, by no means is it, you know, completely horrific. There's lots of teachers out there who are doing, you know, their masters in gifted education, which is basically, you know, what you need to do here in Australia in terms of getting being trained in gifted education. There's lots of teachers out there doing that, bringing that into the classroom. There are principals out there who are trying to identify gifted kids within their school and provide those services. And I think that's a really important part of the conversation as well. I do have a podcast lined up with a local principal who has brought in a gifted program to their school. And I think it's important to talk about those things because it shows other principals, other teachers, other schools that, well, this can be done. It's not impossible. It just takes some understanding, and, you know, benchmarking and looking what other people are doing. This is not impossible. We can do this. People are doing it. And there's lots of educators out there who do get it. It's just not enough. We need to keep working this one. And I think we need to be really honest about, you know, the kind of load we're putting on teachers to be responsible for leading that. And some of them are taking it upon themselves to get that extra training and really understand this cohort of kids. But others, it's just not registering yet. And the broader understanding isn't there. And I think that's because of the misconceptions about what giftedness is. I was actually talking to just my mum recently, who'd been at a thing with friends and family and talking to a teacher. And of course, you know, how's the grandkids, and, you know, giftedness comes up. Mum, I don't think she sort of volunteers that information, but sometimes it comes up. And, you know, and the person she was talking to was a teacher, and their response was, yeah, I don't believe, you know, we should do different things for different kids. They should all get the same thing, you know. And it was really kind of a sad view, really, and outdated. But I think that's an honest reflection of perhaps just the outdated information that a cohort of teachers are acting on. And I think parents really feel that when we have to communicate with teachers who don't kind of get giftedness in terms of that neurodiversity and those special needs. And it makes it really hard. And it's kind of like, it's not, you know, that's a part of their journey, their training, their experience. But I actually think that leadership within schools has a big role in educating, you know, their team, their staff, their teachers, their SSO about these things as well. Because I've also experienced both myself personally, but get that feedback from other parents, is if the leadership within a school doesn't get gifted, sometimes it doesn't matter how great the teacher is. You've got a brick wall. And it's so important when you're looking for a school for your gifted child that you suss out the leadership. Do they get gifted, first of all, so you don't get that brick wall when it inevitably comes up when you're requesting something which the teacher needs to get approval for? And does the teacher get gifted? It's really important to have those layers in place. And, you know, we can do this. This is about knowledge and sharing knowledge, and sometimes accepting we don't know everything about a topic and there's more that we can learn. And that's definitely something I've experienced over the last 12 months of talking to people. I have learned so much from all of the different guests that we have had on the podcast. And I think one of the big things I have learned is the way in which giftedness filters through life, and naturally you experience that as a gifted person and a parent of gifted kids. But when you're actually talking to someone and they're able to articulate that, you know, there's a light bulb that goes on. I'm thinking of particularly a podcast with Dr. Matt Zakreski, where we talked about you know, puberty and sex and sex ed, which was a great podcast. But it was I think the gem in that podcast was actually acknowledging that our kids' sensory issues are, you know, sometimes they're for life, and they're going to impact their lived experience going through puberty and relationships. And we kind of need to understand that knock-on effect. And I think one of your other partners and an organization I talk a lot about is GROW, Gifted Research and Outreach, who have done amazing research, pulling together, you know, that kind of the academic papers about the gifted brain. And so they're all about helping educators, doctors, psychologists, medical professionals, any kind of those professionals to understand that giftedness is going to impact the way an individual's body experiences the world. So, you know, falls into not just education. And I think sometimes we focus a lot on education because we're having to deal with getting our kids through school. But the other layers to that is we need psychologists who get gifted. We need doctors who get gifted. You know, we need all of these professionals who understand the implications of being gifted on your body and your mental health, so that we can get adequate support for our kids and ourselves. And that's not out there either, you know, and that comes up time and again with parents from all over the world. It's like, I need help in this regard. I'm trying to find someone who gets gifted, let alone gets what gifted looks like in an autistic person or a person with ADHD, or like you say, gender diversity, sexual diversity. It impacts all of these things. And for me, that's what we need to educate the world about. It's that the knock-on effect of what is basically a different brain, that neurodiversity on the entire lived experience, not just teachers. I feel like we bag teachers sometimes. It's not intentional.
Oh, I mean, teachers are doing noble work, right?
Oh my God, yes.
You know, I just had speaking about conversations that we have with others about, the movie, right? So I was in Atlanta for a weekend after a film shoot in Georgia for the G Word. So it was on my mind, right? And I was visiting with a friend who was staying at the home of two dear friends of his who were teachers, retired teachers in their 70s, and had been in the public school system in Atlanta for 40 years, right? And Atlanta is a, extremely African-American city. It's one of the most Black cities in America. There's a strong Black middle class, a strong Black upper middle class, a strong Black upper class. I mean, it is a beautiful Black city. And so, race and equity are in the mix in public life in that city. And when I talked to them about making a film about giftedness and equity, one of the things they said was, oh, isn't that funny? Because in Atlanta, it was always the almost near retiring teachers that were given the gifted classes, because those classes were considered the easiest classes to teach, right? And so you talk about these sort of these kind of old ways of looking at things, or outdated looking ways of looking at things. In my view, we need to start living and working and teaching and empowering people in the 21st century. It is 2021.
Yes. Hallelujah to that.
Yeah, we're 21 years into the 21st century. It is now about time that we actually start to operate like we're in this new century.
Yeah.
And really, really sort of set aside those things from the last century that are holding us back. If somebody says a comment and they're a teacher and they say, oh, I think all students should be taught in the same way, like what kind of world are they living in? What kind of world are they teaching in? That's just about, making it easy for, every kind of stakeholder, when nothing about this is meant to be easy, right? We are living in very nuanced times where challenges and opportunities sort of sit right alongside each other. And education, can be a solution in choosing a way forward with those challenges and opportunities. It should be a partner in all of that. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be creating walls for young people or families. It should be creating opportunities to break through and push through. And so whenever I hear any kind of old kind of statement about what we think we should be doing that just smacks of that last century, I'm always like, can you join us in the present? And in the present, classrooms look like this now, okay? Yeah. And neurodiversity, which has always been there, it just wasn't understood well, right? Yeah. But now that we have more research, more information, it should empower the curriculum. It should empower the point of view. It should, these are beautiful things to highlight in our children and in our adults. In every zip code across every country in this great planet of ours, it's I think this is a pivotal turning point, getting us into this decade and this century, and really owning these ideas at this moment. And I can't even relate to people who focus on, old guard ways of thinking about education and young people. We really have to push through. We have to push through into this century. It's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do. And we just need those serious conversations like at unis for the new teachers coming through. And we need principals and leadership to really be leaders in this area to meet the needs of what is, quite frankly, huge numbers of children. We're not even talking about small numbers. And I think, and in all that, acknowledging the massively important role that teachers play. Like, I can name teachers who were pivotal in my education, who make a huge difference. It can make or break a kid. It's like, they're hugely important individuals and profession. And we also need to see and I think value the profession as well more highly. And I know that that's, roles that are heavily women, like teachers, childcare professionals. We need to be really valuing these roles because they're playing a huge, a huge impact on all of the young people who will be adults one day. And that investment in that growth and development will pay off when they're, solid, rounded, healthy, kind of mentally healthy adults kind of doing their thing. So it's definitely about the long game. But I think if I could do anything, I would possibly start with renaming Gifted. I think and this is a conversation I had quite in depth with a friend of mine about the dangers of pathologizing something. However, I think part of the challenge of giftedness is that the challenges of the gifted brain that go along with those gifts of high IQ and learning quickly are not recognized and therefore are not supported the same way that other neurodiverse brains, like being dyslexic, ADHD, autistic, there are both challenges and there are both strengths. But those challenges are acknowledged and supported. And while I hear in my friend's kind of, he's very much a part of the mental health healthcare profession, and I'm very much a strength-based believer, like 110%. However, what I hear from parents is when your kid is just gifted, they don't get help from OTs and psychologists for the overwhelming sensory needs that they have, for the anxiety and depression that they have, and the mental health challenges that they have from being gifted and experiencing the world in the way that they do. They can't get access to, whether it's physical aids or occupational therapists or any of those things, because they're just gifted, because we don't see it as a neurodiversity. And therefore we're not acknowledging that along with the high IQ comes actually a whole bag of other stuff, which can express itself in different individuals in different ways. And some of those ways can be really, quite frankly, hard, really challenging. And I know a bunch of kids, and I'm thinking of one in particular, a young boy, and he's an absolute dynamo. He's 5, he plays the violin, he regularly watches TV in Italian or Chinese just for a bit of challenge. His mum is amazing, but it is hard because he is going at 150%, 24/7. He has a range of sensory needs. He has this great emotional depth and complexity, which means there's anxiety, there's that existential drama going on, and they need that support and they can't access it because he's just gifted. And we need to do better. We need to see it as a neurodiversity. It needs a big, long name with an acronym that everyone feels comfortable about. Let's face it, once we've got some letters instead of the word gifted, people will, I think it's the nature of us to accept it and see it differently. And I think I'm really hoping in the next kind of 10 years, we start to understand giftedness in that sense of truly different brains and truly neurodiversity. Because even now, reading modern books that talk about neurodiversity, they don't mention giftedness at all. And it's like, this is a big omission, the DSM-5, there's no giftedness in there.
Right. How do we get those ideas in there, right? How do those characteristics of giftedness, which look and feel and smell and taste like challenges to our strengths, how do we get those validated and verified as being, important to be in the room with the conversation around meeting the needs of the child or the student? I always come back to the book that really made a difference for me when I was beginning to do my research on this movie. And that book is Andrew Solomon's Far from the Tree. And I don't know if you've ever read it. It's quite a read because it's like 1,400 pages. It's a big book. And it is a book that is about parents who had children that they didn't expect. That's the guiding principle of the film, of the book. And and every chapter focuses on a different type of child that parents didn't expect to have. And so you have children who are deaf, children who are dwarf, children who are transgender, and children who Andrew Solomon calls are prodigies, okay, or profoundly gifted, right? And he used a different word, the chapters on prodigies, but he's basically describing giftedness.
Yeah.
And that the gifted child is a child that we don't expect to have. That very often that comes with challenges, right? And what he does in the book really beautifully and elegantly is that he talks about each of those things as being a disorder. He does us the service of leaning into the concept of them being a disorder, because that is how there's trauma in all these journeys. And so, and you can't sort of sidestep that. And once you kind of lean into the fact that these are disorders, in some way, shape, or form, even with all the baggage that word has, is that you realize that there are things you can do to make it better.
Yeah.
For the child, for the parent, navigate school, navigate life, navigate relationships, navigate work. And so it was so important that he put the gifted child or the prodigy into that book, because it showed that, it was the same kinds of challenges, right? Different type of situation, but same types of challenges are facing these children that parents don't expect to have, right? And what an interesting and important way to think about it, and how that could unfold for a parent and a child in a family system to work through those things together when the school is an active partner in that journey. That I really think is the thing that I've seen when it's working really well in Gifted. It's because the family and the school, or the home and the school, are a system that's working to the benefit of the child, and that can happen in every kind of school setting. It's really possible.
It is, and you're right. It's absolutely crucial, and I think this is probably why we talk about education teachers so much. And there's two quotes that I love. One was from Maria Montessori in the early 1900s, and she basically says, a sign of the right education is the happiness of the child. I've not quoted that correctly, but along those lines. Yeah. And my very first podcast with Linda McGuinness, who's a principal of DARA, which is the School for Gifted Kids, there's a similar quote, and she says, when you get the education right, everything else melts away. The behaviors, all those behavioral challenges melt away when you meet those needs. And it's fundamental that we acknowledge those challenges, acknowledge those special needs that this unique group of kids have, and do better to meet them. Because, as a community at whole, we're all going to benefit from having happy adults doing their thing in a world. That's my goal as a parent, is having, my children getting to adulthood and being resilient and confident and knowing who they are. And they get that from going through an education system that gets them, because so many kids go to school and they feel broken. They get told not to ask questions. You know, I hear that. It's like, they're like, oh, I have to, yeah. So the story that this is a true story of a new child at Dara. I was talking to Linda and she said that a child had started at Dara, and which is a very different model of education, being, you know, focused on the way gifted kids learn. And the child was like, and the teachers were like, you know, you're quiet. What have you got to say? You know, they're trying to get this child to come out of themselves. And basically the student said, well, at my old school, I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I wasn't allowed to put up my hand. And like that child just thought that they were bad, broken, wrong. They couldn't even ask a question at school or put up their hand to feed that curiosity, because that particular place wasn't the right fit for them. And it might be the right fit for many, many kids, but we need to acknowledge it's not the right fit for gifted kids. And when we get that right fit, we get happy children, and then that bleeds out into happy parents, happy families, and then, you know, the bubble keeps growing. This is how we get a better world. It's one by one, I think. So massive conversation there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is so important to keep the discussions going. For me, you know, I'm so empowered by people like you who've grabbed hold of the mic, who are producing content, who are engaging in these deep global conversations with people who are passionate about this stuff. That is the beauty of this moment. You know, we are able to be in conversation with one another around the world and find solutions together. It is a truly empowering moment to be living this and doing this work. So thank you for all you do, because you are a part of this incredibly vital landscape of storytellers and voices that are really giving face to this cause and showing us how urgent and important it is, you know, and that if we get this right, so many people will benefit. Civil society will, you know, do better. You know, it's a hopeful and beautiful undertaking. And so thank you for what you do.
It is, I consider it my absolute privilege and absolutely a pleasure. And, you know, we can do this. And you know, I'm forever the optimist, and, you know, I can see the logic, and it's like, we can do this. We can do better. We can make it better. We can have these global conversations and national conversations and do better. I really do believe that. And thank you for pulling us all together from around the globe for Gifted, Talented and Neurodiverse Awareness Week this week. I'm hugely looking forward to all of the conversations that are going to happen this week. I know there's a sneak peek, there's a theme each day that's going to be talked about. And it's really exciting. And I think you're doing a great job showing that leadership, pulling people together. And, you know, and we need more people, you know, willing to just kind of go for it. And, you know, and it's kind of not getting it perfect, it's getting it done, which is my mantra. So
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. So the state of giftedness is hopeful. It's not perfect, but if we work hard, we can get it done.
Absolutely. In a nutshell, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much for your time today, Marc. I know this week's going to be wonderful and exciting, and I encourage everyone to register if you've not registered or already. I'll put the links in the show notes. Check out the free content that's going to be on every day in the US, here in the podcast, and through all sorts of partners that Marc's got involved. And maybe even just kind of share the love of giftedness. Be a little bit brave, you know, share some stuff on Facebook, because I know it can be a little bit hard. When I first started out, I had a parent who said, I never share anything about giftedness on my Facebook page, but she said, you were going live every day. So I thought, if Sophia can do it, I can be brave and share something. So I'm like, and that was amazing. And I do get the fear. So maybe share something on your social media, let people know that it's happening. And I will put the link in for GROW, Gifted Research and Outreach, because I think their work and knowledge around the brain is hugely important and pivotal to this conversation. So thank you again, Marc. I'm really looking forward to an amazing week.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you for all you do and this chance to talk with your audience. And here's to GTN Awareness Week. Yes.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.